Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to catch all our future deep dives. Today we're going deep into the world of electric vehicles and global economics. Oh, and labor practices too. Get this. Chinese EV, giant BYD, build your dreams. Well, they're facing a bit of a nightmare down in Brazil. They were trying to build their first EV factory, outside of Asia, and it's hit a major roadblock. We're diving into some news articles today, and they reveal exactly why. See, Brazilian authorities, they just completely stopped construction on the factory. The reason? Allegations of some really horrific working conditions. Like slavery-like, they're saying. Over 160 workers were actually rescued from these conditions. And the construction firm, the one BYD hired, they're the ones being held responsible.
It's really a shocking situation. To really get the gravity of this, you have to understand what slavery-like conditions mean. Legally, in Brazil, we're talking debt bondage, where workers are forced to work to pay off debts, and any work that really violates basic human dignity.
So not just bad working conditions, but like potentially illegal practices too. And to add to it, it seems like these workers were victims of forced labor as well.
Exactly. A lot of them had their wages withheld, and they were facing crazy fees if they wanted to break their contract, so they were basically trapped.
Man, that's a far cry from build your dreams, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're talking workers sleeping on mattresses on the floor, crammed bathrooms, and really severe restrictions on their personal freedom. It's hard to believe this is happening at a company that's like a major player in the EV market, even surpassing Tesla in sales, right? This Brazilian factory, it was supposed to be a big part of their expansion globally with a massive, like, $484.2 million investment. Now, everything's just frozen. BYD, of course, has responded to the allegations. They've publicly cut ties with the construction firm, said they were pushing for improvements all along, and they even moved the workers to hotels. It really makes you wonder, though, how much did BYD actually know? And is this response really enough to address all the harm that's already been done?
Yeah, those are important questions. I gotta remember, BYD is a Chinese company, and this all comes at a time when Chinese businesses are under a lot of scrutiny, especially from places like the US.
Especially in the EV market, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. has been very vocal about wanting to protect its own car manufacturers. They see this influx of Chinese EVs, and they're not thrilled.
Yeah, there are a lot of concerns about unfair competition. Some argue that the Chinese government subsidizes its domestic car makers in a way that's just not fair. And that's led to, well, the US and the EU both imposing tariffs on those Chinese EVs.
This whole situation in Brazil, it feels like it's just adding fuel to the fire.
Oh, absolutely. It plays right into anxieties about labor practices and fair trade. It might give those who support protectionist measures, more reason to push for stricter regulations on those Chinese imports.
So this isn't just about one company and one factory. This incident could really impact the whole global EV market.
It really could. We're seeing this intersection of global economics, ethical concerns, and international relations all collide in this one event. It's a pretty complex situation with some serious consequences down the line.
And for you, the listener, it raises questions about the products you buy and the companies you choose to support, right? We'll be digging into those questions more in just a bit. But first, let's take a closer look at what this all means for BYD and, well, the future of the EV market.
This whole BYD thing, it's a real wake-up call, isn't it? It shows, like, the hidden costs of globalization. There's so much pressure to keep costs down, especially in a competitive market like EVs. And sometimes, that pressure, it leads to this race to the bottom where worker rights are just sacrificed.
Yeah, it's a tough reminder that progress isn't always, a straight line. We all love the potential of EVs. Revolutionizing transportation,
Yeah.
helping us tackle climate change, all that, right? But we can't just focus on the shiny new tech. We got to pay attention to the human cost, too. The cost of making these technologies, no matter where it's happening.
Absolutely. And it's not just BYD or EVs either. We see this kind of labor exploitation everywhere, right? Garment factories, electronics, agriculture. It's a constant struggle to make sure workers are treated fairly, especially with these global supply chains.
Mm.
So complicated, so easy to hide things.
So what can we even do about it? Can we really eliminate these practices in a global economy? Seems like a pretty impossible task.
It's definitely a huge challenge, but I think we can make progress. It takes a multi-pronged approach, though. First off, companies need to be accountable for their suppliers, not just saying, oh, we didn't know. They got to actively make sure their partners are ethical.
So like doing their homework, making sure their sourcing is ethical, being more transparent about their whole supply chain.
Exactly. But it can't just be companies policing themselves, right? Governments have a big role here, too.
Right. Stronger labor laws and actually enforcing them in their own countries and internationally.
And there's that balance to strike. Governments need to work together to make things fair. If one country has weak labor laws, companies will exploit that. It puts everyone else at a disadvantage.
So it sounds like it'll take all of us, not just businesses and governments, but, well, everyone.
You got it. Consumers have a role, too. We have power in the choices we make. We can demand more transparency and support companies that are actually committed to being ethical.
Voting with your wallet, as they say.
Right. And don't underestimate your voice either. You can spread the word about ethical brands and call out the bad ones. Public pressure is a big deal. It can really create change.
There are also a lot of groups doing great work, right? Organizations trying to improve labor conditions globally.
Oh, yeah. Tons of NGOs and advocacy groups. They're working nonstop to promote fair labor, fight human trafficking, and empower workers. Supporting them, whether it's donating, volunteering, or just raising awareness, it all helps.
So it sounds like there are ways we can all contribute, even in small ways, pushing for a more just global economy. But let's come back to BYD. What are the consequences going to be for them?
Well, in the short term, their reputation is taking a major hit. Construction's halted, and they could face legal action, both from Brazil and maybe even from the workers themselves, seeking compensation.
And long term?
It could hurt their expansion plans big time. Consumers might boycott them. If they see BYD as complicit in all this, well, that's bad for business.
It really shows you that cutting corners on ethics, even for short-term savings, can have huge long-term consequences. Makes you think twice.
Yeah. And this also brings us back to that scrutiny on Chinese companies globally.
Which ties into those trade tensions we talked about between China and the U.S. and Europe, too.
This could definitely make those tensions worse. If this is seen as unfair competition or ignoring labor standards, it could lead to more protectionist policies.
It seems like finding that balance between free trade and fair labor practices, that's a tough one in today's world.
Oh, absolutely. It requires careful thought, open dialogue, real commitment to solutions that work for everyone, businesses and workers. We got to move past this us versus them thing and find ways to cooperate. Everyone wins that way.
So big picture, what are the takeaways here? What should our listener really be thinking about?
I think there are a few big ones. First, labor exploitation is still a massive problem. It's not just a thing of the past, it's happening right now. Second, globalization makes protecting workers' rights way more complicated. Supply chains are so huge, it's easy for companies to ignore what's happening far away.
And third, this isn't just a problem for governments or businesses. It's on all of us. As consumers, citizens, we have a responsibility to be aware and to fight for change.
Exactly. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but even small actions matter. We can build a more just and equitable world, bit by bit.
That's a good point. It's easy to be cynical, but this reminds me that collective action works.
For sure. Every choice we make, every conversation, it all adds up.
Well, that wraps up part 2 of our deep dive. We've been talking about some, well, heavy stuff. Labor exploitation, global supply chains, international trade. It can all feel a little overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to shift gears a bit. Let's talk solutions. What can we, like regular people, actually do to make a difference?
Ah, the big question. And the good news is there are things you can do. You have more power than you might think. It starts with being informed, right? Don't just buy stuff blindly. Do a little digging. Find out about the companies you're supporting.
So where do you even start? Are we talking hours on corporate websites, digging through reports?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that intense. There are websites, organizations that rate companies on their ethical stuff, including labor practices.
Yes. So I could actually find out if, say, my new EV or those cool sneakers I want were made in a factory that treats its workers right.
Exactly. And if you can't find the info easily, just ask. Contact the companies directly. Ask about their sourcing, their labor policies, sustainability, all that.
I like that. Put them on the spot. What about, like, social media? Can we use that to raise awareness?
Social media is a powerful tool. Share info about the good guys, the ethical brands, and, well, call out the bad ones.
Strength in numbers, right? If enough people demand better, companies have to listen.
Absolutely. Public pressure works. It can really drive change. And speaking of collective action, supporting those organizations working to improve labor, that's huge.
Right. There are so many NGOs and groups, though. Where do you even begin?
Do some research. Find one that speaks to you. Maybe they focus on fair labor standards or fighting human trafficking or helping workers know their rights.
And you can support them in different ways, right? Donating, volunteering, even just spreading the word.
Every little bit helps. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about taking those small steps, making conscious choices, and adding your voice to the chorus demanding change.
This all brings us back to BYD and the whole EV market. We talked about how this could make trade tensions worse, but could it also, spark positive change?
I think it definitely could. This has really put a spotlight on labor exploitation in EVs. Companies, governments, they're being forced to take a hard look at what they're doing. And consumers are paying attention. There's a real demand for transparency in the EV supply chain now.
So maybe this, as bad as it is, could be the push we need to see real progress on ethical sourcing and production, especially in a market that's growing so fast.
I'm hopeful. But it's going to take work. Consumers, investors, policymakers, we got to keep the pressure on. Hold these companies accountable. This can't just fade away.
This deep dive has been, well, eye-opening for sure. It's a real reminder that our choices, what we buy, it affects real people.
It's also a reminder that we're not powerless. These global problems are huge, yeah? But we can all make a difference. It starts with awareness, but then we got to act.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the BYD factory controversy. We hope this has been informative and maybe sparked some questions for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the deep dive for more deep dives, into all the news and stuff that matters. And hey, share your thoughts on this episode on social media. Use the episode hashtag. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep learning.